In the heat of an affliction, we may feel so certain that we're right and that we're justified for feeling and acting the way that we do, even with afflictions and negative actions. And only later we come to recognize that our behavior wasn't skillful and, in fact, was non-virtuous. And it could be very easy to get down on ourselves thinking, oh, there I go again, getting angry. Or what was I thinking? I'm so stupid. I'll never change. But thoughts like those, though they're habitual, they don't help, do they? So what's an alternative? What's something that we can do to address the afflictions that we find coming up in our mind? Recently, we came across a passage in Foundation of Buddhist Practice that stood out to me, and I found it helpful. It's in the section on the four opponent powers, where His Holiness and Venerable Chodron give a detailed structure or template for working with our mind and especially with afflictions. This is on page 304 in the hard copy. So it says, first learn to accurately assess your actions, accept responsibility for your misdeeds, admit them and regret them. Strong regret is the key to purification, for without it there is no motivation to counteract negativities. Make an effort to understand how you became involved in these negativities by reflecting, was my interpretation of the situation accurate, or was it skewed by my self-centeredness? What was my motivation? How were my body, speech, and mind involved in this action? Do I engage in this action often? Did I rejoice with this action? Using my Dharma knowledge, how could I think about and deal with a similar situation should it happen again in the future? So I like formulas. I like templates that make it easy for me to just, go down the line and think about things. So let's take a look at these. Was my interpretation of the situation accurate? Was I seeing it accurately? Was I seeing all sides of the situation, or was I just seeing it through the filter of I, me, and mine? Often the case, huh? This is actually harder to do than it seems. It's humbling to recognize how we describe a situation to ourselves often strongly influences how we experience it. And while some of our thought processes are accurate, many of them are not, surprisingly. Although we like to assume that how we view a situation is accurate, when we take the time to reflect and really check up, it's often humbling to see how we're influenced by assumptions, by destructive emotions, by previous habituated tendencies, by projections, and by mind reading, thinking we know, assigning motivations to people. As an example, Venerable Tarpa has mentioned a few times that in her early days at the Abbey, Venerable Chodron would be giving teachings on the self-centered thought, and Venerable Tarpa would take personal offense from these teachings. And then she would go back and she'd listen to the video again, and she would wonder, what did I take offense to? In a similar way, many years ago, I recorded some online sessions that I had done with a therapist, and often in the sessions, I would find myself feeling quite triggered. And then I'd go back and I'd review these videos, and I'd be wondering, what was there? What happened? And so that has given me pause to at least have a question in my mind, like a doubt, like, well, maybe it's not exactly how I see it on a good day. That's what happens. In nonviolent communication, we're advised to describe just the bare facts of the situation. And that also is harder to do than we think. Like, what would a camera record? And this helps to eliminate our assumptions and projections that we add on. So this step alone of looking at our interpretation, that can be very helpful, and that can eliminate some of the afflictions that come up. The second question is, what was my motivation? In other words, how did my attitude affect what I said and what I did? Did I have a positive motivation? Did I have an affliction running in my mind? Were the 8 worldly concerns involved? What buttons of my own were being pushed? What was behind my actions? And often things happen so fast in our interactions with others that we're not even aware of what's motivating us. And so this step brings more information and more awareness to our habits and how we're interacting with others. The third step is to look at how were my body, speech, and mind involved in this action. And so this is kind of like the performance branch of a complete path of action. How did my actions affect the situation? Really noticing. How did the other person respond to what I said and did? Were any of the 10 non-virtues involved? And then the fourth step, did I rejoice afterwards? In other words, was the negative action complete? Was I rejoicing in what I had said and done? Or did I generate regret? Or did I think about applying an antidote? And then finally, the fifth step, using our Dharma knowledge, we can contemplate how we might deal with that same situation in the future should it come up again. How might we do it differently to get a more positive outcome? What meditations and antidotes can help us avoid similar reactions in the future? So His Holiness and Venerables say such in-depth reflection will help us uncover destructive emotional, verbal, and physical behaviors. And by understanding these, we can begin to change. We have a better chance of actually changing, not just repeating the same actions again. So keeping this little template on our desktop or printed on a piece of paper can be very helpful to know our minds, to know our habits, and to bring about positive changes in our reactions with others, and especially in certain situations where we get triggered. So I'll give you an example. Recently, we were setting up for a puja, and Venerable Chodron's desk was over there, and there were a couple of big tables sitting next to it. And I thought, that she might not feel comfortable being so boxed in by these tables. And so I thought, I'm just going to pull these tables back a little bit to give her more space. And so I looked around the room to see if, who might help me. I always assume that people want to help me. Do you assume that? Gets me into trouble. So one of the nuns came in the door, and she had a chugu in her hand. And I said to her, hey, can you help me move this table? I think it was like that. I would have to check with her to see what was her side of the story. But I said, hey, can you help me move this table? And then what I observed was there was a person standing there with a chugu. A certain look came across her face that made me assume that she didn't want to help me. And then eventually she helped me, and so we've been on. So if I take a look at these steps, was my interpretation of the situation accurate? I assumed she didn't want to help me. In fact, I assumed she was mad at me. It was all about me, my self-centered thought came up immediately. She doesn't want to help me, she's mad at me. Was that correct? Probably not. I didn't check with her, but anyway. What was my motivation? Well, I think I had a good motivation for moving the table. I may not have had a good motivation for responding to her anger, her assumed anger with my anger. Okay, so that wasn't so good. How were my body, speech, and mind involved in this action? So if I look back and think about that, I probably had some impatience because the puja was about to start. So there may have been some impatience coming across in my voice. There may have been a little bit of a demand. Sometimes that can come across. Maybe you can let me know if that happens. Okay, the next question is, does it happen frequently? So I'll check the room. Does that happen frequently? Yeah, I'm working on that one. Did I rejoice afterwards? No, I wasn't rejoicing. It didn't feel very pleasant, so I wasn't rejoicing. Well, there may have been a little, no, anyway. And then, how might I deal with this similar situation should it happen again in the future? Well, the fact is, we don't know what's going on with any person at any given time. We don't know what buttons they've got going that day. We don't know what interactions they just had, what pressures are on them from all the other things that they're carrying, what kind of traumas they bring with them from childhood. We don't know any of that. Well, we might know a few of those, but in any given moment, a lot of it is up for grabs. We don't know. And so what I took away from this is I need to slow down when I ask people to help me. And I need to do it I need to ask in a way that allows for a person to say, no, I can't help you, and be okay with that. So I found this process, I think it was just after Venerable had taught this, I found this process very helpful. It reminds me of something similar that we've done with NVC, where we look at, how do you describe the situation, and what were your feelings, what were your needs, that sort of thing. So I'm glad to have a Dharma template to work with. So if that's helpful for you, we'll post the questions and try working with them. See what you find out. See if it's helpful. I know for me, it helps to take me deeper into what was really going on and what was my part. And that's always a good thing.